The White conversation is just so tired to me. Um, the one thing I want to say, uh, there are a lot of people out there who are going to view Derrick White, right? Derrick White through the prism of how he played in San Antonio or even how he's played in Boston in the past. And I want people to tune into Boston Celtics games more and just try to understand how big of a role White is taking on. He is not this super role player that people make him out to be. They run offense through him all the time. He is a vital part of what they do. It's not like he's doing a thing that other people could do and he's just doing it better. He's playing multiple roles in this offense, and he's doing them really, really well. Of course, he had EPM loves him, but just like going across, like even if you just look at his shooting numbers, he's getting to the rim and better at the rim than he's ever been. Of course, a big part of his impact is 3-point shooting, and of course, a big part of his impact is defense. I just want to dispel the notion that he's just basically this role player merchant, because when the game gets tight and they need a basket, it's not as much Tatum or even Jaylen Brown anymore. They're putting the ball in Derrick White's hands and letting him run pick and roll. And I think that's been a really cool development for a 29-year-old guy who wasn't known for that in the past and was basically just reliant on his shooting to confer impact.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. I will say, despite the evolution of his role, to kind of take some of those on-ball reps and take some of that creation, initiation role, he still floats in and out of those roles, right? Like he is a guy who can float between being the on-ball guy, being the off-ball guy, playing really whatever role the team needs him to play, which I think is inherently valuable. But I do think like when it comes down to this impact or this dynamic between the value or impact of a primary creator versus a role player, like I think this is something that I really want to spend a minute here talking about. Because I think that there's like kind of like traditional basketball wisdom says that the primary creator is almost like inherently more valuable than a role player, like especially the best ones. So when you're picking for the All-Star team, I feel like we tend to heavily factor or heavily favor primary creators, and it's almost like they get extra credit for being in that role. You're like a primary creator. And like maybe it's warranted. I'm not saying that's not. But I feel my belief of the argument goes like, okay, this player is more valuable because they're doing a more difficult job, one that requires more skill that fewer people can do at a high level, and that is more critical to the success of the team. So yeah, cool. That sounds like it all checks out. To me, I was trying to think in my head, like before we started the pod, like a kind of analogous relationship to me would be like a doctor-nurse dynamic, right? So like doctors are seen more valuable to patient outcomes, which is demonstrated by their pay. Like objectively, they're seen that way because they have more responsibility, they have more training, they have more skills, et cetera, et cetera. While nurses are also extremely critical to patient outcomes. No one would say, oh, we just need doctors, we don't need nurses. Obviously, no one would believe that. But in relative terms, they're less valuable. So if this is the dynamic, right, it would make sense to me that we would vote in more doctors into the All-Star team than we would nurses. But if this is the dynamic, I need someone to explain to me why Derrick White is the only quote-unquote role player to have impact as great as some of the best primaries in the league. Of the top 30 in EPM, there's exactly 3 players who have a usage at 20 or less. So James Harden, who we know obviously has the ball in his hands constantly, might have the ball in his hands the most on anyone on that team, and has an assist percentage in the 97th percentile. So that's one. And then the other one is Isaiah Hartenstein, who leads the entire NBA in defensive EPM and has a slight negative offensive EPM. Then the last one, Derrick White. Derrick White, furthermore, there's only 5 players in the entire league who have at least a +2 offensive EPM and a +2 defensive EPM. Should I go through the list, Geoff? The 5 players in the league.
I would love to hear him.
Joel Embiid, SGA, Giannis, Kawhi Leonard, and Derrick White. That's it. That's a dope group to be a part of, I think. So to me, I accept if this dynamic exists, let's take this at face value. Primary creators have disproportionate value, then role players provide impact that is not as quite as high because of the difference in skills, the difference in difficulty, all of that stuff, responsibility level. Why do I have one role player who provides impact and value comparable to some of the best primary creators? If I do, then he has to be an all-star. Like, it's like if I have a nurse who's individually providing more value towards patient outcomes on a comparable level to some of the best doctors, that's insane. That's insane. And in fact, that's more impressive than the doctors who have all of the skills and experience, because he's adding so much value from a place that typically doesn't provide that level of value. So you're talking about your Jason Tatum doesn't have to be as good as Embiid because the difference is being made up from a place that no other team has a player who is adding that value from. So that makes Tatum have to do less. And that is incredibly valuable. To me, Derrick White is indisputably an all-star. I think that this is probably going to be the one that gets the most pushback of our group, but this is the one that is most obvious to me, or one of the ones that is most obvious to me.
And to just keep trying to paint an objective picture for people who are maybe on the fence or against this, but are open-minded, to try to paint a picture for the role that Derrick White's taking on and how valuable what he's doing. So White, before he came to Boston, had never shot better than 36% from three. So first of all, fuck whatever magic Boston has that just turned this guy into an elite shooter. Like, I don't know how that happened or how that occurred. I'm joking. But so he shot 38% from three last year. Guess what? He was assisted on 90% of his threes last year, which is not super high. That was in the 38th percentile. But this year he's shooting even better, almost 40%, 39.6% from three. He's being assisted on 78% of his threes, the 18th percentile. He's self-creating over a fifth of his threes. Like, I don't think people realize how ridiculous that is. Is that Jalen Brunson level of self-creation? No, but he's shooting a ton of pull-up threes, just a ton of self-created threes in the pick and roll. And that's an incredibly valuable thing. They're leaning on him all the time in these games. This is just, I mean, your summary was really great. We haven't even talked about his defense really, besides, you mentioning that he's one of five guys who is +2 or better in EPM on both sides of the ball. He's an incredible defender. I said it in one of our first podcasts. If you're a Knicks fan out there, Derrick White is like super Emmanuel Quickley. He's like Quickley if Quickley was more consistent and just better and taller. Like, that's what he is. He's just such a good player. And for this Celtics team, like XJ just said, he allows guys like Jaylen Brown, guys like Jason Tatum. He's similar to Kristaps Porzingis in that just his presence allows these guys to be the best versions of themselves. But in a vacuum, you could stick him anywhere and he would be providing this impact. It's just being magnified because Boston is such a perfectly put together team that we're finally realizing, like, holy shit, these guys actually matter.
100%. And, and honestly, I don't want to seem like I'm closed-minded about any of this. Like, I feel very strongly about this, and I think the data supports my strong feelings about this, and not just EPM. We're talking about other very reliable impact metrics, LeBron, box plus minus. We're talking about his efficiency. We're talking about his overall impact on his team. All of those things, they completely check out, but I would love to hear other people's opinions. If you feel strongly Derrick White is not an all-star, I'm open to other perspectives that would suggest that should be the case. And maybe there was something off about my analogy or some of what I talked about. And I love to hear people poke holes in it. So I'm open to that.
I just think he's a great example of how we can let our biases totally lead us to the conclusions that we want to be led to. Because every anti-Derrick White stance that I see just starts with, oh, he's a role player. Like, that's just it for them, And so for some people, there's just no getting beyond that. And I think if you're listening to this and you are open-minded, whether you're as high on Derrick White as we are, you have to try to look beyond that because it's just not that simple.